let's make a dish that was a Christmas tradition in my house when I was growing up. Swedish potato sausage, but I'm changing up the recipe. Yeah, Swedish potato sausage around Christmas time was an absolute must in the house when I was growing up. Now, my father's family was from Sweden. My mother's family was from Ireland. It really was my mom that took over making this recipe, which was my grandmother's on my dad's side. And it was her recipe. And if you look at Swedish potato sausage, you will find hundreds of different recipes because so many of them were adopted by individual families and what they had on hand. So this is based upon what would have been my grandmother's recipe, though I am changing it. And I don't know if my mom would be okay with this, but we're gonna smoke this Swedish potato sausage because traditionally it was boiled. That's how we made it. And then my mom would freeze it and you'd take it out of the freezer and fry it up and add some salt, and it was delicious. But I'm gonna add some smoke flavor to this recipe. Now, we're starting with ground beef and ground pork, so we're not gonna have to grind the beef or the pork. You can do that. My mom and dad never did that. It was always pre-ground because we could get that at the butcher and that's much easier. But I do have my grinder out here because we have to grind up some potatoes and some onions. Now I peeled the potatoes and cut them up into what I like to call grinder-sized pieces, pieces that should go into the grinder mouth here. Same thing with the onions. Then I salted them and roasted them at 350 degrees for about 35 or 40 minutes. That's just to get a little bit of the cooking started. Once they were out of the oven, I chilled them down completely. Now, that's different than my mom too. She would just chop up the potatoes and the onions and feed them right into the grinder with the meat. No pre-cooking or anything like that. You can definitely do it that way, but you'll generate a lot more liquid when you grind and you'll have to get that liquid out of there. So let's go ahead and grind our potatoes and our onions up. And I have a medium grinding plate in my grinder right now, and it is frosty because you really want to work with cold metal parts when you are grinding and stuffing sausage. So after I grind here, I'm going to clean this, get it in the freezer again for a little while before we actually feed everything through to fill our sausage casings. So let's fire up the grinder. So here is our bowl of our potato and onion mixture. It has moisture, but it is not dripping wet, and that's what you want. By pre-roasting the potatoes, you get a lot of the moisture out of there, same with the onions. And this is 4 pounds of potatoes and 2 medium white onions. So now what we need to do is get this mixed with our 4 pounds of ground pork and 4 pounds of ground beef. Yeah, it's a 4-4-4. Beef, pork, potatoes. And as I mentioned, other recipes, you'll find different ratios. So in my large bowl here, which is the largest bowl I have, and I always joke about not using a big enough bowl, with everything else in this, it's going to be pretty tight, but we'll make it work. Now I've got 4 pounds of 85-15 ground beef here and 4 pounds of ground pork. You could use 80-20. I really wouldn't go any fattier than that, like a 70-30. That's a lot of fat in here. As you can see, the pork itself has quite a bit of fat. Now, in terms of what we're going to add to this for seasoning, we're going to add salt and pepper. We're not adding any curing salt. Some people do add curing salt to the sausage like this for Swedish potato sausage, but we never did because it's cooked immediately after, and then whatever you don't eat right then, you freeze. So we're not adding any curing salt to this today. First up to this, I'm going to add 4 teaspoons of kosher salt. Some recipes call for a lot more than that. I like to go light on the salt. You can always add it later when you're eating it if you want. We're also going to add 4 teaspoons of ground black pepper. Some recipes add allspice, but my mom and dad never added anything other than salt and pepper. If you want to experiment with it and add allspice or look at some other recipes, yeah, go for it. Now, before we add our potato and onion mixture here, I want to pre-mix this a little bit, get that pork and that ground beef to get to know each other. Now, once this is all mixed up with the potatoes and onions, it's going to go back in the refrigerator and it's going to be in there for about an hour to really chill down before we start filling our casings. It's always best to work with really cold ingredients when you're making sausage. One of the reasons for that is the fat in the meat, if it heats up, will get gummy in the grinder as you're stuffing the sausage. and it just makes it a lot more difficult. I don't know what my mom would think about me smoking this instead of boiling it, but hey, it's my generation now, I get to try it. I remember when she showed my kids when they were little how to make it right here in this kitchen. That was something special. Mom's been gone for, let's see, 14 years now. All right, let's get our potatoes and onions in here. And mix. Now, when my mom and dad would make it and I would help them when I was young, we didn't have a motorized grinder. We had a hand crank grinder that you kind of clamped onto the kitchen table, ground up everything, and they would hand stuff the sausage through a little funnel. So yeah, I've got it a lot easier than that. It's really important at this stage when you're mixing that you make sure that these potatoes get really incorporated in the meat mixture, because you don't want big hunks of meat like this without potatoes mixed in, and vice versa, you don't want just potato there. Now, I've seen some ratios here where you'll have, say, 5 pounds of ground beef, 5 pounds of pork, and 20 pounds of potatoes. So some recipes are very potato heavy. Now, if you have one of those fancy sausage mixers, that will make this a lot easier. I think this is going to turn out good smoked. I'm going to be smoking it on the Master-Built Gravity Series 600 charcoal grill with some applewood for smoke. We're going to be using pork casings today. And really, if you like making sausage, use whatever casings you like. I think we're looking pretty good here. All right, I'm going to cover this with plastic wrap, and it's going to go in the refrigerator, like I said, for an hour, and then we will go ahead and fill our sausage casings. So I have my hog casings. These are natural hog casings already on the, what do you call this? The horn, the filler tube? I'm not sure what you call it. But I'm going to go ahead and tie off the end here. Now, whichever sausage casings you're using, if you make this, follow the directions on the package on how to prepare them. These you rinse in cold water and then you soak them in warm water for 30 minutes after you run warm water through the casings. And because this is not a continuous feed sausage filler, I'm going to have to push it down through the hopper right here. You got to kind of just control it, and you're not just letting it go. You've got to hold on to it and just take your time. So you get the picture. It's very noisy doing this, but here is the sausage coming out. I'm going to go ahead and fill the rest of this. Then what's going to happen is it's going to go on a tray in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes just to settle down, let everything sort of come together again and firm up. Then we'll get it out to the grill. All right, here is our Swedish potato sausage. I grabbed 3 of the links here. I'm just going to cut into one of them, but I can tell you right now, this is not what they looked like when I made them as a kid. When you boil them, they come out kind of gray. So giving them the smoke, it really does bring in a little bit more of that redness. If you've done sausages or any meat really, and you give it a fair amount of smoke, you will get a little bit more of that color, that redness develop. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to change this recipe a bit. So let's cut in and have a taste. Oh, that is exactly what it looked like when I was growing up. Now, I don't expect this to taste really, really different, maybe a little smoke flavor, but let's see. That is Swedish potato sausage. That's exactly how I remember it tasting, except again, for a little bit of the smoke flavor with it. And to me, that's kind of more of an aesthetic thing here, rather than just a gray piece of sausage. It has some color to start with. Now out there, I smoked these at 250 degrees. It took about an hour and 10 minutes to get them up to an internal temperature of 160 to 165 degrees. Now, because there's quite a bit of fat in here with that ground pork, it can actually tolerate beyond that to say 175 or 180 even, kind of like a chicken thigh. So it doesn't really dry out if you go a little bit beyond that 160, 165. And the reason I didn't really do any talking out there was pop it on, pop it off, and it's done. This was just 2 of those lengths of sausages. The amount of meat I made would make quite a bit more than that. So just keep that in mind. You can ratio this down. You could do 3 pounds. You could do 1 pound of ground beef, 1 pound of ground pork, 1 pound of potatoes, and just sort of increase it and take your seasoning up and down with that. I almost was going to add some jalapenos to this to kind of take it a little bit out of Sweden and bring it to the Southwest, but I'm kind of glad I didn't.